Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Emerging Brands Podcast with Kelly Bennett. That's me. Hi. Each week, I talk with someone who builds cool emerging brands. And this week, I'm getting to speak with someone who not only builds emerging brands and has worked with heritage brands, but also has crafted a personal brand as an artist, as a designer, as a business person. So, Rich, too, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Of course, Kelly, it's my pleasure and very excited to chat with you today. This is awesome.
Amazing. So, a little backstory, I connected with Rich when we were on a panel together at New York Design Club. And I remember texting my girlfriend before the event. I'm like, I don't even know how I got on a panel with this guy. Like, he's like, has a major career. And like, honestly, you being there just made it feel even cooler. And then seeing you speak and seeing your presentation, something that has really stood out to me is your story of how you've really weaved all these different intersections of who you are as a person, as an artist. And so I would love to hear a little bit of how you built this personal brand for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for those kind words. And
Of
likewise at the
course.
At the New York Design Club, it was so much fun being on that panel with you and also kind of feeling the room, feeling the energy. That was a great day. And the crowd, especially, I remember being very receptive and super
Super
nice,
engaging.
super engaging. The venue was kind of cool too. It was kind of like a two-screen corner
Yeah.
situation, felt like a little mini TED Talk. But the kind of to answer the question about how I kind of weave all that stuff in, a bit of my background is I was formerly trained as an illustrator, and this was, oh my gosh, like over 15 years ago. Like I initially did not take my creative career seriously once I graduated from undergrad. I went to Rutgers University for undergrad. And then I wanted to take a creative career in earnest afterwards, with a bit of encouragement from some folks around me. I've always tried to surround myself with, like, supportive people, and specifically my brother-in-law, Jason Atienza, who was also a creative at BBDO for years. He's worked at Wyden. He's worked at a few different places, as well as a great artist himself. He graduated from the School of Visual Arts in Chelsea. It's interesting. I teach there now. I have a class tonight as well. So kind
So
of full
full
circle,
circle.
very full circle. He encouraged me to pursue it. So I went to continuing education for like 2 or 3 years in order to build a portfolio from scratch again, because I didn't go for that in undergrad. And then I started just submitting my portfolio for illustration gigs, which at the time for me was very editorial. So it was newspapers and magazines like the New York Times and Bloomberg, um, uh, and the New Yorker, stuff like that. And that required me to actually physically bring portfolios in to get
Mm,
reviewed by art directors and creative directors and design directors.
back in the
So
day.
back in the day, exactly. And that's kind of how I got my start. I was able to build a bit of a following within that community for a few years. Got my master's degree at School of Visual Arts, eventually graduated in 2009. But I was already a working professional by that point. So it was just, kind of immersing myself in the world on a much deeper level. And then I found my way into advertising and branding, and also worked at a few large companies along the way. And I'm super like truncating that part of the story. But really, it was a whole journey, and where I just wanted to pursue my own creative interests, as well as expand my skill sets, right? Like some of the best creatives, I think, operate on a massive, huge level. Someone like, oh my gosh, Guillermo del Toro, right? Who's a great director, right? Like he is essentially an artist. If you look at his sketchbooks,
Right.
he's brilliant. Or even someone like Tim Burton. He also, started out as an illustrator, even going all the way back to Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol started out as an editorial illustrator and used to do magazine and just jacket covers for records.
I didn't
And then
know
he
that.
became yes, if you look
Cool.
up some of his work from the 50s, he's very much like a Leroy Neiman-esque designer. Even someone like Jeff Staple, someone who I've interviewed for my podcast, he used to design covers for the Fader, as well as
Mm.
hip hop album covers like the CD era in the late 90s, helped establish the language of hip hop. And he is a, he's a multimedia, personality slash business owner. So like there, I feel like there is a logical track for a person that is interested in that kind of stuff that does require, to your point, creating connections with brands that operate at scale, at a Fortune 500 scale, as well as creating a personal brand for yourselves. And it's a lot of work to maintain, but if you have the energy for it, I think people are receptive.
I love how your story also started with really going and pitching yourself and building that muscle, because that's something that so many creatives in their head about. And I love how that was part of your journey, because that's at that time how you had to pitch, and just putting in the work and building that muscle of putting yourself out there. Do you feel like that foundation still helps you now?
Oh my gosh, it absolutely helps me. Because in my current role, outside of my personal artistry, I'm a partner in an ECD at Sunday Afternoon. We're a small agency that focuses on campaign work as well as large branding identity projects. We're in Soho. Look us up, sundayafternoon.us. And you're just pitching all the time. And even
Right.
when I was at MTV, constantly pitching all the way up the chain, up to the presidential level. At Nike, I was pitching and presenting up to the heads of design. Imagine at a firm like Nike. Even my previous role at another agency, we were just pitching all the time. So that's kind of in my blood, the idea of presenting, and also taking a large amount of information and trying to condense it down to understandable bits. So if you have a mind that can think in bullet points as well as articulate those bullet points and kind of be entertaining at the same time, and you have a level of craft associated, you can go pretty far.
That's really interesting, because something that I've really noticed now, seeing you speak a few times, which has been awesome, you're really great at telling the story and breaking down the critical pieces and taking someone along the journey. So I could see also how you've then leveraged that skill to being a keynote speaker. And it looks like you're traveling the world doing that too. Like, seriously, so many goals that you are living that I know so many creatives seek to do. What has been something that's helped differentiate you in the market? Something that has helped you stand out
Mm.
in front of the eyes of these gatekeepers, stakeholders, decision makers? Because again, you've worked with some incredible global brands that is probably on many, many people's dream list to work with. What do you feel has been some things that helped differentiate you?
That's a great question. And also, I don't think it's a question I actually get oftentimes. I think people want to ask that question, but no one rarely's asked it.
Well, I'm
That's a
here
great
to
one.
ask, because I'm
Yeah.
so curious.
I think it's two things. I believe it to be, and I think this relates to your listeners as well as anyone that wants to break into the space. I think there's the actual skills, the talent, right? The ability to execute, the ability to lead a team, the ability to get the job done in whatever capacity that is, right? Whether it's with your own hands or whether it's working and collaborating with others. Also, I really found a meteoric shift in my personal brand presence when I started to lean into my identity and become and being very identity forward. So for myself, I know myself to be a first generation Filipino-American, part of the AAPI diaspora, as well as part of the community of BIPOC QT individuals that also create a larger community that is also often meant to that is often positioned as very forward thinking, let's say, not
Mhm.
to get too like left and right about everything. So when I started to vocalize that as well as become much more vocal about social impact and social justice, especially during the pandemic, actually during really starting with the Trump years, actually going all the way back, then people started to reach out for thought leadership as well as opinions and kind of guidance when it came to talking to communities that I actually represent. And
Mhm.
I'm okay with that. I know that others aren't asking for that type of pedestal or that type of position to be put in. But also I believe that if one is put in the position, that if you choose to take the position, then great things can happen as well. Because at the end of the day, someone has to say something, right? So that's really started to change. So when I was at Nike, again, I started a podcast called First Generation Burden, which focused on the intersection of immigrants and the creative community. And I found a lot of positive sentiment from the immigrant community that was so wonderful and so beautiful. And that kind of kept the podcast going. I'm still working on this last final season, trying to get to 100 episodes before I jump into another
Amazing.
thing. But it's one of those things where content's hard, right? And also you have to cast it, you have to do the whole thing. So actively working on that. I know I've been saying it for a minute. And then also during the pandemic, and I was at MTV at the time, kind of a wave of anti-AAPI sentiment during the pandemic started to really hit a critical point.
Right.
So during certain conversation touch points at a corporate level, I would be asked to insert myself, and I would willfully insert myself into those conversations, because also there is a lack of Asian executives, especially in large organizations like that are willing to jump in front of something. And I'm a bit more vocal. And with that comes more asks for speaking engagements, as well as thought leadership, especially for months where you celebrate milestones like AAPI Heritage Month in
Right.
May, as well as Lunar New Year that recently
Hmm.
just happened. And I my Filipino community does not celebrate Lunar New Year, but we have come to, in America, um, enter in the larger AAPI diaspora. So now it's become a bit of our, I heard a friend say this the other day, it's like our St. Patty's Day, you
Okay.
know, where
Yes.
we just want to have a great time. And I think that's really cool.
I think that's really cool. And what it sounds like also is that the more that you stepped into these different aspects of who you are as a human,
Yes.
it really opened the door in a more organic way than forcing yourself to be all these different labels. It was
Hmm.
you just stepping into like, this is authentically who I am. And it sounds
Yes.
like that has really organically found its way of how that works of differentiating yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
I really resonate with that too, because for me, I had so many different identities and I always felt like I was playing dress up of like trying different literally hats on. And it wasn't until I was just like, hey, I'm queer. I am a girl in business and like I have learning disabilities and like I'm kind of figuring shit out on the fly. Come with me, everybody. And and that has really been the thing that people are like, thank you so much for saying that. Like, thank
Yes.
you for being honest. And I just really appreciate you sharing your story of being yourself and how that organically translate. Because I think so many people need that reminder.
Yes, 100%. Like, little sidebar, I read
Yeah,
this book very recently called User Friendly, and it's about how the hidden rules of design change the way we live. It's by a former journalist within the design community, kind of focuses on UX, UI, named Cliff Kwong, and another design practitioner named Robert Fabricant. And it's a great book. I would say check it out, buy it, read it, listen to it, whatever. And they talk about the history of the user UX from even a product standpoint, going all the way back to like World War I and World War II. How you had to
that's
create,
interesting.
like, very interesting. You had to create panels and design panels in military vehicles that could be picked up and operated by anybody in theory, right? And then that thought process of creating easy to pick up, like, user friendly product interfaces physically and then future wise digitally, that was something that only started to be quantified in the 60s and 70s. But when they started to quantify it, they created, or an author whose name I'm forgetting, wrote a book where they kind of measured the average human, male and female, at the time. So, like, based on an average, they would create the ergonomics of certain chairs, doors, whatever, just so that on in theory the average human being could enter indoors and sit in chairs comfortably, fairly comfortably, right? So
Wow.
yeah, it's kind of crazy. So that in theory, again, all our feet wouldn't dangle off chairs, or we wouldn't all just be like sitting in a prone position or something. But with that also comes a lack of nuance when it comes to specific audiences and
Hmm.
people that also don't fall into what is quote unquote the average.
Right.
So that was an important step to take those measurements and understand. But then now, when it comes to the specifics and the nuances of you, myself, and individual human beings, where we understand that we are an assemblage of very critical, important pieces, kind of like in a Venn diagram of the things that make us us, then now we're starting to understand if you move around the Venn diagrams specifically for certain audiences, then you can create more user friendliness for that specific audience in whatever way that
Yes.
manifests itself, whether it's like through reading convention, the way we understand, the visuals and language, or even to the ergonomics of our own bodies, or whether on our certain abilities.
That is a really interesting perspective. And I think that also speaks to understanding data and
Mhm.
history and how actually looking back could be really encouraging and inspiring to move forward. Because I'm sure a lot of people are doom scrolling and it's like everything is melting. But at the same time, there is this opportunity for more nuanced conversations and people who hold different identities to break out and to really
Yes.
get themselves out there. And so I think that's a really great perspective. There's another book from Stefan, I forgot his last name, he's a designer in New York, and it said, "Now is better." I don't know
Sagwester?
yes, and,
Yeah.
that's his whole, thesis as well, and so I really love that, and I think, again, it's like that encouragement, that light, you're like, "Okay, there
Yeah.
are more opportunities." Something that I also wanted to ask you is that the way that you and I know balance is always like a word that we use, but there's no such thing as like absolute balance. But how do you integrate your artistry and your business, right? Because you have to, I'm sure sometimes you're a partner in an agency, you're pitching, you're looking at client work, you're in email. But then I also, something that really struck me when you're giving your presentation the other day at Samsung, you were like, I just spent the weekend at the Brooklyn Museum and I really
Hmm.
loved how the red paint in this painting really popped out, and I was like, "Damn, Rich is he's in his shit." Like, that is it really was it was such a small thing that you had mentioned, but
Yeah.
I was like, "That is a level of someone in their craft that I just I love and I admire, and I always seek to, like, be in that space myself." What has been maybe your strategy or your mindset, maybe daily habits that you have to do both?
It's not easy, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And I don't sleep a lot. And that's more of a me thing. I think it's something that happened when I entered my mid to early 30s, and I'm in my early 40s now. When I entered that point, I just started waking up super early. So I
Okay.
started to do these exercises um, where I would creatively give myself an hour to make something. And also at the time, I had moved to Oregon, so I was feeling kind of isolated from my New York friends. I was living in,
Sure.
working at Nike for 2 years because they operate in Beaverton, Oregon, and Oregon is the mecca of sportswear in this country, which is and Boston is the second mecca, which is also interesting.
So
Um,
interesting.
yeah. Actually, fun fact, the recreational activity of jogging kind of entered American psyches through Portland by virtue of Oregon University with a book called Jogging. It was a Swedish book, Jogging. We Americans called it Jogging. And then that found its way into the hands of Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman and Steve Prefontaine, who helped form
That
the trinity that is Nike.
that is really
Yeah.
cool. Who would
Yeah,
have thought that?
I
You know what
know.
I
It's like
mean?
it's wild.
That
Uh,
is.
so yeah, I started waking up really early and started doing these creative exercises that took like an hour, 2 hours max. It's kind of like I like these speed trials. just to test myself. And then I also found myself going to the gym in the morning. I've always been a bit of
Mm,
a gym rat since I was in my 20s. And yeah, there was a time in my life where I actually wanted to be a competitive bodybuilder, which it's kind of weird to say on a
interesting.
podcast. But yeah, I've been like much heavier in my life, and I've always like tried to. I like to it helps me with time management as well as a meditative act for right in my life. And so I would just wake up hella early, go to the gym, do something creative, and then start my day. And then that just
Okay.
became a way for me to get my brain ready just to act, right? So then
Hmm.
when I moved back to New York, it would still do the same thing. I would wake up hella early, would do something creative. And then at that point, I was an executive at MTV. So waking up early and being creative meant firing off emails as well as responding to early morning emails, possibly at a presidential or a CMO level, try to like, with critical thinking involved and going to the
Right.
gym. And then also working with a team in order to what I like to call keep the trains running on time, because it was very much
Sure.
a standard process of doing things. And what was really great about being in a community like MTV and also Nike as well, and especially a Sunday afternoon, what was really great there was that they valued subject matter expertise by virtue of your own lived experience. So I was a creative executive there, and they appreciated that I made time for myself to be creative on my own terms. So
Hmm.
that also meant I could take side gigs like doing murals. I could work with other clients. And Sunday afternoon, we represent artists. They represented me. It's how I got involved. It was founded by two of my dearest friends.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool.
yeah, so they represented me as an artist. So when I'd work with clients like let's see, like Adidas or actually A24 for Everything Everywhere All at Once, or Reebok recently, or something along those lines, or even Mini Cooper, that came through Sunday
Right.
afternoon.
Huge.
Yeah, like that was all done in my spare time just because I
Wait, that
found
was
the
all
time.
done in your spare time? I'm
Yeah, that's
just
all done in my spare time.
replaying your presentation. Those were epic campaigns, and those were in your free time.
Yeah, I would just wake
Wow.
up at like 6 or 7 a.m., do a thing, then start the day at like 10 a.m. or in an office, quote unquote, and then I just
That's
work.
incredible, Rich.
Yeah. I'm not
That
saying
really
everyone needs to
is.
do that. I'm just a bit of a freak.
No, I admire you sharing the transparency of what it takes to have such a multi-hyphenate career, because it's not just one track, like you have many different things. And you're also a professor,
Yeah,
right?
and I teach 1 day a week at the School of Visual Arts for a class, actually interesting enough, called Design, Content, and Not Losing Yourself in the Deluge. So it's a convergence of three important things. It's about design
Cool.
thinking, content creation, and personal authorship. So a lot of the projects involve those three things in some capacity. And that was offered to me by someone who I really admire and appreciate, Gail Anderson. She's the chairwoman of the BFA Design and BFA Advertising tracks at the School of Visual Arts. She was also on my podcast too, and she's wonderful. Had a storied career at Rolling Stone, storied career at Spotco, designing for Broadway and entertainment, and I've always thought she was an icon. So when she reached out to
Incredible.
me, yeah, she reached out. She's like, "Hey, you want to teach a class on Wednesdays? You can make up your own curriculum." I was like, "Yeah, let's do it."
Yeah. That's so cool, Rich. What is your vision of what you want to do next in your career?
What I want to do next is re-enter entertainment on some level on the production side. No, production's the wrong word. On the development side,
Okay.
I think that what's interesting is I've kind of done a lot of things, and there are a lot of stories that come with those projects, and I have the energy to tell those stories. So that's kind of my goal, is to quantify those stories. And I've also seen the development process happen on the back end by virtue of being the marketing side of that world, right? And I also know how long certain things take. There are a lot of things I don't know. There's probably more that I don't know than I do know. But at least I've seen what the track can look like.
Right.
So I think what's interesting about the design and creative world is that it's not overlooked, I'd say, but I'd say misrepresented, because there's drama, there's also business involved, there's
Right.
interesting personalities, and a lot of things happen on screen, which I think has always been a barrier to tell stories. Like you look at a show like The Bear, it's about the story of a brilliant chef going back home, and starting a new business, right? There's a lot of stories to mine from that, but also we know how to shoot beautiful food. People tune
Hmm.
in just to see the creative process when it comes to making food. But with design, the things that happen on screen, our eyes are not trained to look at what's happening on screen and like kind of feel the same positive sentiment like we do when we see food being made. But that's now shifting because of the way that actually the pandemic was an accelerant. Like there was a film called Missing, which was really great, which is about a young daughter looking for her mother, played by Nia Long, and it all happens through chats on her screen. It's fascinating, brilliant movie.
Wow. Okay. I'll look it up.
Yeah, it's a great movie, great narrative. I loved it. Has like a high 80s rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Or even like the film Past Lives. Have you seen Past Lives?
No.
By Celine Song's an A24 movie, and I think she was nominated for Best Director, maybe Best Screenplay, I forget, but either way, it's well worthy. So it takes place over the course of 3 points in these two people's lives, and the center middle section, they meet again in college through Skype. So the very extended period of time
Hmm.
where they're just talking through Skype, and it's like it's heart-wrenching the entire time. So now the reason I say that is we as an audience are now attuned to the language of design as well as seeing things happen on screen where we don't disconnect from story by virtue of what's our on-screen visual. So I
Right.
think we're primed to tell stories, especially with spatial computing and the Apple Vision Pro. Like it's now just on our headspace to see a screen floating in the world. Like that's okay to
Right.
us. You
Right.
know,
It's becoming normal.
it's normal. It's not weird. So we can tell good stories with that, I think. I think it just putting the right team together is telling the right story is important. So that's something I like to do.
I can't wait to see that happen. It's going to be
Fingers
cool.
crossed.
Regardless, it's going to be cool. Whatever you do, it's going to be cool. What last question? I could talk to you
Mhm.
forever, and honestly, I just feel even more creative having this conversation, so thank you. Where
Likewise.
can people connect with you and see you speak? I know you were like again, you were just at Samsung. Where can people find where you're at?
Absolutely. Well, there are a few places you can find me. If you want to find me on social media, I'm usually at rich_tu on Instagram and X and Threads. I think I'm also that too. I don't not often a Threads person or like an X person. I do more scrolling than I do writing, but I'm very active
Same.
on Instagram. Yeah, I think some brains are just calibrated towards certain
Yeah,
things. And if you want to check out some of my personal work, it's rich2.com, RICHTU.com. If you want to check out Sunday Afternoon, like there's amazing roster of artists as well as projects there. It's sundayafternoon.us. One word, the way you normally spell Sunday afternoon. And if you want to check us out on social there, it's at We Are Sunday Afternoon. So WEARE Sunday Afternoon. That's on socials. And if you want to check out First Generation Burden, I have about 80 something episodes on there. Just look up First, FIRST, Generation Burden, BURDEN, spelled normally, on anywhere you find your podcast content. So more episodes coming soon on that. I'm hoping to drop episodes by the end of the year.
incredible. I will put all the links to all the things in the show notes because I know that people are going to want to connect with you and
Mhm.
all the different aspects that they can. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciated this conversation, and I already know so many people are going to feel seen in this conversation and also be that, okay, I got this. Me, being authentic to myself will be the unlock. And I think many, many people need to hear that. So thank you, Rich, so much for sharing.
Awesome. Kelly, thank you so much. And
You're
I
so
can't wait
welcome.
to, oh, of course. Yeah, can't wait to hear this episode. It's going to be great.
Amazing. Okay, bye everyone. See you next week.